Hello, it's the Great Canoe Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Conservative Leadership Race 2022. Now, I've had a couple polls since the last one, and importantly, I am now factoring urbanicity of the riding, and I have also spotted a minor bug. Now, before we go over anything else, I will just disclose what this bug was. So, it turns out, because of low quality controls of myself, and only having myself doing this, it turns out I was considering the provinces, as we can see here, as their 2021 federal election biasy results. So, long story short, it gets a bit complicated in the back end. If we pick something like Newfoundland, I was considering that there were Patrick Brown had zero supporters in Newfoundland. Scott Aitchison had only supporters in Quebec because my model was treating Scott Aitchison on the province level as being the Bloc Québécois. Turns out, that's not what Scott Aitchison is. He is not, in fact, the Bloc Québécois. And Brown is not, in fact, the Green Party. Oops. I'm not going to retroactively change previous updates, even though this is a quite significant bug. It has reduced Lewis's numbers and increased Brown and Aitchison's, and has reduced Baber's number. Charest and Poilievre are mostly unaffected because Charest and Poilievre are treated by my model as being the conservatives and liberals. Or Poilievre was treated as the conservatives and Charest is treated as liberals. Not intentional, and this was only at a province level, not on demographic levels, nor nationally, just in the province, which it's complicated what that actually does to the model, but needless to say, big error. I apologize. It doesn't actually affect anything as Poilievre is just running away with this race, but if it was a competitive race, this would be a really, really big mistake. I fix that now. And as always, if I ever find any more bugs or any more problems, I will announce them, because this is software that this is based off of, and I have the quality control budget of 0 and the other workers of 0, so sometimes I do not notice myself when I make a bug, because a lot of the time in software, as a software developer, the easiest way to catch your own bug is to have someone else look at it and someone else fix it. Fixing your own stuff is a lot harder. So we're dealing with that. It's fine. Moving on. So we've had a couple polls recently. We had Angus Reid poll today, and we had a Leisure poll earlier in June. We've had Abacus put a headline poll, but they didn't have the detailed data, so it was not that useful. But the Leisure one and the Angus Reid one do have detailed data, so it does affect or give us a lot of information and a lot of ability to work with stuff. And because of the considering urbanicity, fixing the aforesaid bug in this new data, we now have Poilievre clawing further ahead to 52.6% and dominating 21,526 points. Now I will note, these percentages and these points do not add up to 133,800 respectively. There are some that are in the quote-unquote other category. This is an artifact because a lot of the early polling before the race was solidified of these 6 had other candidates named. I suspect by assuming we keep getting more polling, we will get to that will be effectively negligible by September 10th when the vote is counted. But if not, we are currently only at 221 points. So it is negligible. It doesn't affect much here. Yes, it could technically affect like Lewis or Aitchison's or, well, the bottom 4 candidates' relative placings. They could be changed. But Charest versus Poilievre, unlikely to be affected by this. So I'm not that fussed about it. It wouldn't be very difficult to remove it. No, actually, it would be really pain to remove it. Regardless, we're dealing with it. it is what it is. Not a big deal. So, overall, what has changed? So, notably, Lewis, Brown, Aitchison, and Baber's numbers are very different. Baber and Lewis have lost ground, and Brown and Aitchison have gained ground, relatively speaking. And their subtotals throughout the entire country are wildly different, so I'm not going to bother covering that. Between Charest and Poilievre, there's a bit difference here. So Charest's done worse, broadly speaking, in Western Canada, and is doing better, broadly speaking, in the Maritimes, and is stagnant in Quebec, and I believe stagnant in Ontario. Hard to say. And the territories have changed a bit, so ignore that. Again, these are not very useful now because aforesaid bug. Poilievre has gained ground everywhere, but he's gained ground very significantly in the West. Not terribly surprising. He's now sitting in Saskatchewan at 74% of the vote. Wow. And if you look at detailed demographics, he is absolutely dominating in most key demographic groups. So you look at, bear with me a second as I get my notes in place. He has 64 and 68% of under 34s and 35 to 54s, dominating those demographics, still 59% on 55 plus. Notably, Charest is 24% on 55 plus and 14% on 35 to 54 and 10% on under 34s. That is a really big one, and that's really the main gist of this race. If we neglect the other candidates, because as much as some people may or may not like them, they seem to be not very relevant. Brown maybe has a chance, depending on how truthful his claim of 150,000 new party members is. I'm, at the moment, inclined to believe him, albeit maybe some beneficial rounding on his behalf. He might have rounded up, that is. But at the moment, I have no reason, per se, to disbelieve him. Now, Poilievre's campaign is calling him a liar, but that's not that surprising. They've been calling him a liar the entire campaign. And they're suggesting that since he doesn't want the numbers published, his number is not true. Okay, maybe. Again, I'm not really certain. I don't really feel comfortable declaring one way or another. But I will say I am very, very confident in Poilievre's number of 312,000 and change. Because Poilievre's campaign has been very adamant that they want all of these numbers published publicly. How many people were signed up on his website, other people's website, he wants them published publicly. Because of that, I'm inclined to give him full belief that he actually sold those numbers, because there's no incentive for him to have the party publish how many memberships he sold if he's grossly off. If he's off by some rounding, okay. If he's off because it turns out some of these applications that were on his website didn't get approved, okay. But there has to be approximately, I would say, 310,000 membership purchases through his website, or else it would be a huge self-own if the party publishes the numbers as he wants. I don't really see any reason why that would be the case. For cases like the other candidates, Charest, Lewis, Aitchison, Baber, I don't know why I keep saying Baber, I'm inclined to believe they didn't actually sell many memberships because they haven't said a number anyways. And the party membership total is only about 600,000. It was about 140,000 before the race, to my understanding, some rounding. So, assuming Brown and Poilievre are both not lying, they are almost all of the new signups. Now, I think there's probably some favorable rounding on Brown's campaign, and in case of Brown and Poilievre, there's probably the case that some people bought memberships that were not eligible to, possibly accidentally buying a second one, or not realizing that they didn't qualify. I don't know how many that would be, but it could potentially maybe be like, let's say 1%. So if we say 1% of their, let's say collectively they had 450,000 memberships and 1% were actually not true. So 4,500. So we are leaving with maybe 15,000 for everybody else, if we assume Brown is correct. I'm very confident in Poilievre. I don't want to doubt Brown, but I have no reason to believe or disbelieve him. And if that's the case, I think it really goes to show the race is... It's a strange race. Now, I will say I have very little I very much doubt Aitchison or Baber sold any meaningful number of memberships. Aitchison himself, prior to running, was a no-name MP, backbench MP. I don't believe he had a cabinet position. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. I cannot check this right now. Actually, no, wait. You know what? I can check this right now. I have the power of the internet. So let's double check this. Do not want to spread untrue statements about Aitchison. But I do not believe he was not a cabinet minister at all. And in fact, he's held it since 2019. So not about 4 years now. But generally speaking, relatively unknown MP. Not that exciting. Pretty unheard of. Conversely, Baber, I think, had a slightly higher profile. He wasn't provincial, which generally reduced your profile, but he did get very publicly kicked out of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party over something related to COVID. I can't remember if it was refusing to get vaccination or supporting/opposing. I think it was opposing a COVID-related mandate. I think that's what it was. Regardless, I think that gives him a slightly higher profile, and at least to my personal experience in the race, because I'm on the CC train of all the candidates and I've been looking at all the media that they've been publishing, Baber seems to have slightly more or slightly better campaigning. At least it feels that way. I don't get many emails from the Aitchison campaign. I get some emails from the Baber campaign. I say maybe about the same. But the Baber campaign also sends town hall requests on a regular basis, where I don't really see many town hall requests from Aitchison, unless for some reason I'm not on his list for that. Frankly, I think Baber's really the only one sending virtual town hall requests, to be honest. But if you're not doing in-person events, well, you should be doing virtual ones. I know Lewis, Charest, and Poilievre all did in-person events in a close enough jurisdiction to where I live that I could reasonably drive there. So those three all definitely tried. I don't recall about Brown. I'd have to dig through my email basket to see if he actually did an event near me. May or may not be true. I don't recall him sending any online town halls. And in the case of Baber, I don't really blame him for not doing a personal town hall or an in-person event, because my understanding is his campaign isn't raising an incredible amount of money. It's not the worst campaign money-raising wise, but it doesn't seem to be that high. From what it looks like, Poilievre and to a lesser extent Charest are sucking up all the donations. Charest seems to be absorbing most of the donations from the Red Tories, and Poilievre is getting a lot from everybody else. Lewis and Brown have some too, but it's mostly Charest and Poilievre seem to be getting all the donations. So the race overall, well, a lot's going on here. And it seems, going into the summer, when generally speaking people are going to be paying a bit less attention, they're going to be a bit more preoccupied, they're with their vacations, they're with their friends, they're with their family, doing outside the warm Canadian summer. Or if you are in the wrong parts of Canada, the unbearably hot Canadian summer. I don't think there's going to be much movement left. And in fact, I'm not really expecting many more polls. maybe one update worth, but after July, if there's not, I don't really expect many polls in August. Maybe you'll be wrong, but I'm not expecting it. I'm also not at this point expecting any more debates to be scheduled. The Poilievre has consistently been leading in every single poll, and his numbers are, depending on the poll, gaining ground. And the important thing too is you'll note some polls. I think the last Ledger poll had him at 47%, and you're like, well, that's not a majority. But then you look into it and you see 22% are undecided or doesn't like any of them. Well, we can pretty much assume that the people who are undecided will either not vote or will be decided. And since we don't know, they're not leaning anywhere in particular, we have to assume they can distribute equally across everybody. And those who don't like anybody are probably just not going to vote in the leadership race. I mean, you look at the last one, I think there was 170,000 voters on 290,000 members. So there's not that many, so I might be slightly wrong there. But the point is, a large quantity of members of the party didn't vote. I suspect that is also going to be the case this time. If we're at 600,000 members of the party, I suspect 200,000 aren't going to vote. Now, a lot of that could very well be, you'll see maybe Charest, Lewis, Brown, Aitchison, Baber. I don't know why I keep saying Baber. Baber supporters. They might not vote because they think it's pointless. And I'll be honest, if you are one of those supporters of one of those people, go vote. You don't really lose anything from voting. I think everyone should always exercise their privilege to vote. Because some countries you cannot do that. You cannot have any choice in the government. In some countries, even you can vote in your elections, but you can't necessarily control the leaders at all. In the case of the UK, for example, it's not impossible, and it's not unheard of, but it's uncommon for leaders to be entirely picked by voters. They often seem to be self-selected, at least recently, have been picked by caucus members to succeed one another. Whereas in Canada here, well, we have primary elections, at least for leader of the party, which, considering how Canada works, that is the most important position. So that is the most important one to actually give voters and supporters of the party a choice on. Now, the big question everyone always has when you're talking about a leadership race, when you're talking about who will win the race, is how are they going to affect the party? Where do we go from here? Well, I think it's pretty safe to say there's been a lot of polls. There's Angus Reid poll recently, yes, that was released today. It was done early June, but it was released today. It's quite illustrative on this, in that Poilievre would not really do much to the Liberals or the NDP or the Greens. Doesn't really affect their bases at all. What his main pitch to the Conservatives, he's going to rally Conservative supporters strongly, possibly rally People's Party supporters to the Conservative Party, and potentially he has some appeal with the right wing of the bloc and other party supporters. Non-voters is not as clear, but they're not normally polled. Or new voters. They're not frequently polled, so it's hard to say. Charest, on the other hand, because he's the main other opponent, has always been the main other opponent in this race, unless the polling is very wrong, and I will admit, the polling was quite wrong in the last one. Lewis and Derek Sloan did significantly better than polling suggested they would do, so that is always possible. But barring the polling being off, Charest's only been in a meaningful race, so the numbers from Charest is apparently he's not very popular. He's relatively popular for the Liberals, possibly the Blue Liberals faction, with 38% of current 2021 Liberal supporters like Charest and would be more likely to vote Conservative if he was their leader. But then you look at the bigger number, and the more important one for Charest is that 47% of 21 Conservative voters are less likely to vote for the Conservatives if Shrey was the leader. And I believe 31% of that 47 is strongly so. Or significantly less likely, or I'm not sure what the exact phrasing of the poll was. But the important thing here is, yes, Shrey winning is, barring polling error, is a pipe dream at this point. And frankly, his campaign has been exceedingly bad, but we're going to get into that in a bit. But if Shrey were to win, given how the party's going, given the endorsements, given the factionalization in the party, Shrey winning is likely going to be, the only path forward for Shrey to win is if, well, it's not the only path, but the path forward for him to win would be more or less, he was really good in Quebec, potentially very good in Atlantic Canada, competitive in Ontario, and does better in BC. If he does that, he could theoretically edge out a victory in maybe the second or third round. Him winning on first round is impossible. It won't happen. Second or third, potentially. Well, maybe third or fourth, because basically, once Brown, if Poilievre hasn't won by the time Brown drops off the list, then it's very likely that Shrey would win. That's the catch, though. I really don't see a scenario where it could even get to the point where Brown's off the list, because if Brown's in third place here, that would require the other three to bounce off, and I'm pretty sure the Lewis and Baber supporters are probably going to transfer to Poilievre heavily. A lot of them probably won't vote, for the record. I expect a lot of the Lewis supporters to not have much in the way of a third choice. They might have a second choice. If I were to bet, the Lewis supporter second choice is probably Baber's probably the only one. Maybe some Poilievre and Baber are probably the only second choices for Lewis voters. But I suspect there's probably not a lot of third choices. And there's definitely not a fourth for Lewis voters. Baber voters, I don't really see them having much of a fourth choice either. Well, we'll see. Well, maybe we won't see. I'm not sure if I'll have that data available to dissect after September 10th. But regardless. So, if that happened, what we would be really seeing is Vancouver, Toronto, Quebec, and the Maritimes voted in a red Tory in the leader of the party. And in fact, some people call him a very red Tory. In fact, some might even say he's actually just a blue liberal. And you might be like, what's the difference between a blue liberal and a red Tory? And there's some differences, but it's like the difference between like 4 and 5. What's the difference? 1. Well, what's 1? Well, it's 1. There you go. Like, there is a difference, but it's not a huge difference. Conversely, like the difference between like 0 and 10. That's 10. That's much bigger than 1. This is a terrible analogy, but I hope you accept it. I suspect if that were to happen, I think most of the West and most of Ontario's existing caucus of Conservative MPs would probably leave the party. I do not see a world where Poilievre loses the leadership race unless it's an utter rebuke where the party survives. I'm talking like if we flipped Shrey and Poilievre here, so Shrey was winning 62 and a bit %, then the party's probably fine. But if Shrey claws it out in like the 5th round, because overwhelmingly metropolitan areas like Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and weird Maritimes, I say weird Maritimes as a Maritimer because I don't really know why the Maritimes is very, well, I do know it's mostly an age thing. A lot of the older people are very fond of the Liberals, but I don't really know why the older people are fond of the Liberals. It's complicated, but they are, and that's their choice, but it is what it is. But if that were to happen, I think the party would break again. I think you would see a really lukewarm, centrist Party, might even call it the Progressive Conservative Party, and then you would see a more populist right-wing party, you might even want to call it the Reform Party, emerge. Now, I really don't think it's likely, because I don't think Charest has any hope of winning. And frankly, as this model shows, and as the campaign has shown, I really suspect Poilievre is just going to run away with it. He is presenting a very clear, very articulate, very consistent image. And the important thing is he's been saying the same message about as long as he's been in public consciousness. So go back to whatever, 2004, whatever, 2006. His first election, whatever that was. He's been more or less had the same opinions publicly the entire time. And he's selling a very, not aggressive, he's selling a very complete vision on how to make Canada better. And that's one of the big things that the Conservative Party has been lacking. I would say in the entire existence of the party since 2004, well, I think it's the 2003 technically, but regardless, I don't think there's been a single leader of the party who had a very strong, very well-formed image of what Canada should become. Now, I was very young when Stephen Harper was in power, so I don't mean to denigrate the man too much, but to my looking back on the history, it really much seems to be the case that Stephen Harper, well, very competent and good and well-run prime minister in regards to how the economy went and going through the crisis and all that things, he was not particularly concerned about doing super conservative things. He did some, like he repealed the long gun registry, but he wasn't the most ardent conservative when it comes to social policy. Very fiscal conservative, though. And he did not appear to really be selling a coherent, detailed vision of what conservative Canada means. In a lot of senses, Stephen Harper likely only won in 2006 because the sponsorship scandal and because the public was fatigued after 13 years of Liberal governance. Now, that is not to say a leader winning that way doesn't make them a bad leader, but it does mean it is a different thing. Poilievre is a different beast for the Conservative Party of Canada. No leader of the party, or even interim leader, I'll give maybe Bergen some slack. I don't know if she might actually have her own vision, she doesn't want to say it because she's the interim leader. But Scheer and O'Toole did not have a coherent, compelling, solid argument of what conservative Canada is. In a lot of ways, Scheer was the younger, more affable, more friendly version of Stephen Harper. But he failed in the sense that he was running against a liberal, relatively speaking, I wouldn't say in their prime because SNC just happened, but a liberal prime minister who had only been one term. It's very rare that a prime minister loses the second election. They normally get reelected at least once. Not always, but normally. So that's a very difficult race. And, well, I think Scheer has gotten a more better at articulating himself. One of the big issues he had in 2019 was he did not have a good way of explaining or selling his vision to people. And that's a lot of the reason he failed. O'Toole, well, he largely failed because he tried to sell a coherent vision and then immediately betrayed all of his voters. I will never stop hitting that can for my entire life As long as it's relevant in the conversation. O'Toole lost himself the election. I don't think he was a particularly strong conservative. I don't think he was a particularly strong leader. And that I don't think he had a very detailed, very clear, very articulate vision of what Canada should become. At least if he did not explain it in a way that I believed. And by that I mean I could understand what his vision was. For example, I can understand what Trudeau's vision of Canada is. I can understand what Jagmeet Singh's vision of Canada is. Doesn't mean I agree with those visions, but I can understand them. I know what they're trying to do. I wasn't really clear what O'Toole was trying to do, and I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't win. And I think another reason why Scheer didn't win. A lot of the discourse in the public, in the media, by politicians themselves, and especially if you go to silly places like Reddit, where you should never, don't go on Reddit unless you want to look at memes. Like, don't talk about politics on Reddit. It's stupid. It's pointless. You're not going to convince anyone, and you're just going to waste your time. But anyways, you look at these places, and a lot of people will sell the idea that the Conservatives need to move to the center to win. I think that is not only wrong, but I think that is actually self-destructive for the Conservative Party. People want, especially in the internet age, especially now, they want authenticity, and they want a clear architect vision for the future that they believe you believe is good. Now, there's a lot of belief involved, but that is what it is. And you can't cynically hit right, pivot left anymore. Not in the day of the internet. That doesn't work. Maybe it worked in the 80s. Maybe it worked in the 70s. Maybe it worked in the 90s. It doesn't work today. You go to a town hall in a rural, tiny place like, I don't know, let's say Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia. Small place. You go to a town hall there, not every one, but there's going to be several people who are going to have their phones out. They might even be live streaming it, but at the very least they're recording it and they're going to post it online later. So whatever you said in a small town, everyone in the world sees it. Who cares? You can no longer hit right, pivot left. That actually destroys your credibility. Because people are like, well, if you're willing to hit right, pivot left, well, you clearly didn't believe the right, and you clearly didn't believe the left. So I don't believe anything you say. And it's like, yep. That is the key, in fact, I would argue, to courting younger voters in modern day. I don't even just mean under 34s or under 20s. Under 20s, that's a relevant demographic. Under, 25s. I don't even just mean them. I even mean the later millennials in the late 30s, early 40s range. The way to court the people who grew up with the internet, or in the future, the people who grew up after the internet was already an established thing, God save them. The way to court these people is to be authentic and to have a very strong, very clear, very concise vision of what you think makes the country better. You do not beat the Liberals as a conservative by being the Liberals, but not. Maybe you're the Liberals on social policies, but you're fiscally conservative. You don't win that way. Maybe you're the Liberals economically, but you're the conservative socially. You don't win that way. You're not going to win that way. Yes, you will point to people like Doug Ford and say, Doug Ford did it, so it can work. Well, I don't know. I don't think that's the conclusion to draw from Ontario at all. What you saw in Ontario in 2018 is Doug Ford completely laughably won because, let's be honest, the GTA voters are very homogenous, at least across the electoral districts. So if you're going to win, it's very easy to win huge in Ontario. Basically, the party who's going to win in Ontario with the current drawn borders is going to win by a lot. Because you're going to win most of the GTA. The winning party is going to win most of the GTA. That's pretty much a given at this point in Ontario, at least until we redraw the maps. So you have that. And in 2018, you also had, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ontarians, 16 years of Liberal government. So very long in the tooth. The state of Ontario wasn't particularly great. and Wynne wasn't popular at all. So then Doug Ford went up and won. He was kind of a centrist, but frankly, I say centrist as in like he wasn't particularly ideologically right wing or left wing. Not as an centrist. No, he was very centrist, though he had a populist Ford Nation streak in him. So there's that. It made him a little more interesting and authentic. So he did have the authenticity. He's very authentically center right. That's Doug Ford, very authentically center right. But the lesson we learn from that isn't that Doug Ford shows that pivoting to the center can help the Conservatives win. It shows that if the other guy, if the people are tired of the other guys, you're going to win easily, regardless of what happens. And then 2021, he manages to or 2022, sorry, he manages to win re-election because he's now monopolized the center-right position. So if the Liberals brush up against him as center-left, well, people are like, well, the center-right current government, or I can gamble on the center-left guys who are almost the same thing. Why would I change it? The current guys seem to be doing okay. And that's the problem, right? When you're talking about beating an incumbent, brushing up to their flank is not always a good way to beat them. If you're talking about you are an incumbent, such as the 2022 federal election, it does make sense for the Liberals to brush up against the NDP. Or conversely, they wanted to brush up against the Conservatives. That does make sense because you are undermining your opposition by taking some of their base. Because you're like, well, you have the safety and security of the current guys, so you know what to expect from us because we've already been here. But we're going to do the things this other guy said to do. Now, you might not trust them per se, but it does work. It does not. There's no data. There's not many elections that exist that show the opposite working. That taking your position and moving and brushing right up real close to the current government party, that doesn't seem to work at all. And look in the U.S. examples, the 2008 and 2012 elections, very much like that. Even possibly even 2004, though I'm not really 100% on that one. Going close to the other guy was not how you won. Obama won really hard in 2012 because he leaned left. And he got a bunch of progressive voters who weren't going to vote otherwise. Huh. Interesting. So it really shows there is an advantage to the incumbent to lean different ways, but there is not an advantage to hug the incumbent as another party. Because unless you're banking on the voters being sick of them, they're not going to come to you. Because if they are already supporting, in the case of Canada, the center-left/centrist voters who are voting Trudeau, unless they are sick and tired and they hate Trudeau now, are going to stay voting with Trudeau. If they already voted for him once, and they are not sick of him, or they don't think he's incompetent, or they don't like him, like if they're content with him and they voted for him previously, there's no reason to expect they're not going to vote for him. And if they're not content with him, there's no reason to expect that they're going to be more content with you doing the same thing he's doing. There's no reason to believe that. Now, it might be the case that they might be more willing to go to you, maybe, but we don't really have any data for that. We have no data for the contrapositive either, but it is a risky gamble to assert that, well, some people might be tired of Trudeau, so if we act more like Trudeau, they'll vote for us more. That doesn't make much sense. In fact, I would wager, it's not going to happen because Charest's not going to win, but I would bet you a lot of money that if Charest was running against Trudeau in 2025, Trudeau will win. Because voters will look at it, Conservatives will be upset because Charest doesn't represent most Conservatives that I know. There might be some that like him, but of the ones that I have in my focus group of my friends and family that are Conservatives, most don't like him very much, or those who are ambivalent are like, meh, and they prefer someone like Poilievre. There's not many people who really like him. And in fact, the polling does bear that out. Of the Conservatives, not many Conservatives really like Charest. So you would have a sagging support on his right flank because Conservatives would be unhappy with him. And even if he holds the party together, likely PPC will skyrocket. And then on his left flank, you'll have liberal voters, the ones who still like Trudeau, or at least are content with Trudeau, who are going to look at Charest and be like, well, the Conservative caucus, like some of them want abortion controls, or some of them want reduced guns. And, well, the Conservatives don't have as much party discipline, so how can we know that they won't do that? Well, that's going to be a really hard thing to convince the voter who cares about those things to vote for you. In fact, it might even be an insurmountable task. And that's really the fallacy I find with saying you should move to the left or you should move to the right. No, you shouldn't do that just to win, especially in 2022 or any future years. The better communication technology is, the more some random 24-year-old guy on his spare time after work can make random videos and get hundreds of people watching them, the more that can happen, the less effective pivoting is, and the more effective authenticity is. If you look at the world of business, in the world of marketing, celebrity sponsorships, they're decreasing. Random YouTubers? Some random dude. Oh yeah, people sponsor him like crazy now, or her. And like, it's some of the most, like, someone like PewDiePie, he's not a small by any means, but he's literally just a random Swede who plays video games. And is amusing to some people. That's his whole shtick. And he makes more money and gets more endorsements and sponsorships and ads than a lot of celebrities who make music or go to or in movies and stuff like that. And that's the way it's going forward, because in a lot of these cases, especially in internet marketing, the authenticity of the person sells the product. It's the belief of the audience that the person shilling the product actually uses the product. That's why it works. Because you, the viewer, if I were to make the pitch for Widget Gadget WWW, you're going to be like, oh man, Bagel uses widget WWW. Maybe that's a good widget. And that whole exchange there was based on the authenticity. That's the basis of the internet. That's the basis of YouTube. That's the basis of my channel. None of you would watch this if you didn't think that the model I was making, I sincerely believe, is correct. Or in some of the more politically motivated videos, and maybe these leadership races ones are more political in the sense that I dive a bit more into political opinions. But anyways, in ones like this, you wouldn't be listening to this. You wouldn't be hearing me. You're definitely not at 43 minutes into this video if you don't think that my opinions and my take has value. And a lot of that value is because you authentically believe that what I'm saying is what I mean. You wouldn't be watching me if you thought I was just reading some script that some random dude prepared, some random other staffers of mine in the back room, don't mind them, pulling the strings. You wouldn't watch this if you thought that's what was going on. You watch this because you believe that what I'm telling you is what I think. It's why you look at cable news networks. Big ones, in the case of the US, like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, or the case of Canadian was like Global News and CTV. They're losing viewerships largely because their viewers are, the old people are dying and the young people aren't watching them. They're losing viewership because they don't feel real to young people. The reason why someone like Tucker Carlson does amazing ratings on cable news isn't because cable news is how you watch news, or because people trust cable news, or because people like cable news. Tucker Carlson does good because people who watch Tucker Carlson legitimately believe that what Tucker Carlson says is what he believes. You look at shows. I'm using mostly American ones here because I don't even know any Canadian ones because they're so irrelevant. You look at Brian Stelter on CNN. He has terrible views because I don't know anybody, even left-wingers, who sit down and are like, I'm talking about young people exclusively. Keep that in mind. I don't know any young left-wingers who sit down and think Brian Stelter means what he believes, what he says, or believes what he says is true. He may say it, but that's because he's being paid to say it. In fact, right now, considering I make no money off of this, I'm probably even more credible because I'm literally doing this for fun / I believe it's a good service to people. Maybe one day I'll make money off this and that'll be a great day for myself, but that's future me problem. And the point I'm making here is that in the modern day, in the day of the internet-savvy politicians who cultivate an authentic vision that sells to their supporters and sells to the public that they mean what they mean and they believe what they believe, and that they're not lying to you, they're not trying to hoodwink you, that when they say they want to give you more freedom, you believe they're going to give you more freedom. And that's Poilievre's pitch. And that's why Poilievre's winning. It has nothing to do with what he supports. It has nothing to do with what Shrey supports. It has nothing to do with Lewis or Brown or Aitchison or Baber. Baber, I said it again, Baber. It has nothing to do with them. It has nothing to do with the media. It has nothing to do with going on in Canada. Sure, all those things frame the subject and frame the debate and create the issues that you're talking about. But people like Poilievre, and people are going to vote for Poilievre, and Poilievre's going to win the race, and probably the next election, because people who are inclined to the right of the political spectrum will listen to Poilievre, they will hear what he says, they will see his tone, they'll see his body language, they'll see his face, and they will believe genuinely that what he says is what he means. He's not trying to fool you. He's not trying to sell you on something. That what he's selling to you is what he wants to actually do. That if he was the prime minister, he would do these things. That is why he's going to win. Because people believe him. And the moment he breaks that trust, he's gone. He will go so far to the dodo, it will be hilarious. Let's say hypothetically here that he gets a normal win in 2025. No early election, just a normal 2025 election. He has a normal win. So he has 40% of the vote, roughly. He has a majority government. If he breaks his word and he starts doing things that are not focused on giving you the most freedom, 2029, he's gone and he's going to probably get like 2% of the vote. He will just get annihilated because the Conservatives will be so incensed and so betrayed they won't vote for him. In fact, they might even vote to remove him as leader. And then he's done. That is what likely is going to happen if he betrays them. So he is what he is. That is why he's going to win. People trust in him because he seems authentic. And that's the future of all politics in not just Canada, not just in the US, but the world. Every democracy that has free speech enshrined and protected, importantly, free speech on the internet, is going to be about authenticity and about brand and about selling people that what you are saying is what you mean. And that's why Charest's going to lose. Because he's the opposite of that. I don't know anyone who trusts what Charest is saying. Everyone's like, well, maybe he means it. I don't know anyone. I know a lot of conservatives. I know a lot of conservative-leaning people who wouldn't buy a membership of the party, but might be inclined to vote for the party. Very few of them really trust that Charest actually says what he says, means what he says. Poilievre does. The issues don't matter. What they're supporting doesn't matter. What they're saying doesn't matter. What there's the crux here is people believe Poilievre, that he's authentic. That's why he's going to win. Now, that said, I'll wrap this up here. So if you enjoyed the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below what you think. Comment below if you are a person who, if you are not a person, don't comment. No bots allowed. But if you are someone who supports Charest and believes in Charest, or Brown, or Lewis, or Aitchison, or Baber, by all means, comment below. I'm mostly citing anecdotal sources here, though, with regards to people trusting him, though the polling does suggest conservatives don't trust Charest at all, so I'm not entirely off base with that one. But if you do, by all means, comment below. It's always interesting to see that and see other perspectives, and it helps me formulate these videos, and it helps me make better content in the future. Because when you're talking about elections and polling, a lot of it is interpretation. And unless I can... the more worldviews I can see, the better I can interpret and the better I can say. If you want to keep up to date with the channel's doing, you can follow me on Twitter at BagelPolling. I will post videos and all that. I'll post stuff about future videos and stuff there, if I'm changing schedules or off topic or whatever. And one last thing, I keep forgetting to mention this, I do now have a Rumble that exists. If you don't like YouTube, you can watch it on Rumble. I don't particularly care either way what platform you watch it on. It just exists as an option now. It takes, in fact, zero effort from me to have both of them, so it is there. And maybe if one day the YouTube censors hate me, I might migrate there, but that is a future me problem. For now, YouTube seems to like me, and I get more traction here, so that is where I will mainly post. Though, everything I post is also going to be on Rumble, so it's there too. But, for now, I bid you all a good day, and I will see you next time. Bump.